This is Sg2 Perspectives, a conversation with Sg2 experts and industry thought leaders about the biggest trends in healthcare and what we expect that's going to mean for the future of healthcare delivery.
The other big picture topic, of course, is the economics. And we had a couple sessions on pure economics and finance right now. And then if you watch the headlines, more systems willing to say, we're going to stand up to the payer. And that's extremely risky. And then I've heard stories of late where the payer is basically saying, we're going to throw you some cash. We're going to give you $50 million, but we're not going to keep you whole on the year over year rate increases.
Welcome to Sg2 Perspectives. I'm your host, Trevor DaRin. I have Bill Woodson joining me today. We're going to talk about our Executive Summit, which took place the last week of July in Chicago. It's always a big deal, big relief for us. We put so much time and energy into it. But the best part is that we get to hear how the big themes we're talking through resonate with the audience. And so Bill was the deliverer of so many of those themes and the visionary for most of the summit. I love to hear Bill's take on what some of the big takeaways were and how it really resonated with the audience. So Bill, thanks as always for joining. And coming out of the summit, what's top of mind? What are your big takeaways?
Yeah, let's go to big picture first. I was struck by just the comments we got from some of the participants, and I've got three that come to mind. The first was a quote from Randolph, who is the CFO, Chief Financial Officer of UC Irvine, and he brought up the idea that to be successful right now on a leadership team, you need to be able to complete each other's sentences. And to me, that was a huge takeaway. People expanding their roles, their reach, their ecosystems, how they work as a system. We had another quote about organizational structure matters, but it doesn't matter as much because there's so many people working across the organization, informal relationships. I thought Randolph's statement was so powerful. The second was from a strategy officer who said, we need to be a chameleon in your role these days because we're asked to do different things. We're fighting for airtime about what strategy is, what we're supposed to do, who's in the room, how we make an impact. And actually, I'll ask you to respond to that in a moment. And then the third one was a quote from David Randall, who's the chief strategy officer at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, a person I've known for more than 25 years. And he said, part of my job is actually to both create chaos in the organization and to predict it, to keep things moving. So the theme of the conference was about making pivotal moments. We're not turning 180 degrees, but maybe it's 20 degrees, maybe it's 25 degrees. And I love David's thought about provoking it and also predicting it. I thought that was a powerful takeaway. But Trevor, give me your high picture takeaway as well.
I had a similar interaction that left me with a similar takeaway to your first one about how much C-suite teams are just feeling like they have to be synced up right now. Went out to dinner with a chief strategy officer and a COO, and we were talking about an upcoming strategy retreat that I was going to join them for. And the CSO got up to leave for a moment, and the COO was able to keep the conversation going. Oh yeah, here's the vision for the retreat. Here's what we want you to do. Here's how it's going to fit. Here's how it fits into our strategic planning calendar. I'm not sure if I expected a COO to do that even 2 or 3 or 5 years ago. So teams feel like they're rowing in the same direction.
You know, the other big picture topic, of course, is the economics of what's reality right now. You put together a pretty powerful slide on just the bifurcation of operating margin performance over last year. We talked about that. And then we had a couple of videos with Ken Kaufman, and Kaufman Hall is now part of Vizient and now connected to Sg2. His take was, hey, there is capital spending going on. And we asked the audience, like, how many of you are building inpatient capacity? A lot of hands went up. So it's still there. There's still the basic bricks and mortar depreciating assets, which is a tricky business right now, depending on market you're in. But what Ken brought up is it's these other things right now about portals, the data infrastructure. It's more operating X than CapEx. And he highlighted that as something that is a confounding issue for the chief financial officer, but also across the organization right now.
I've heard systems saying, we're doing okay. We're going to hit our budget this year. It's not a super aggressive budget, but we're going to hit it. But we need to be at 5 or 6% margin to fund capital needs. And we haven't been there for a few years. And they don't see that in at least the next couple of years as a reality. So I feel like the finance piece is still an undercurrent that everyone is wrestling with.
It's local, and I just got back from Dallas, which is basically Mars in Planet Healthcare, the U.S., because the operating margins are so good. But unless you're in Dallas or Columbus or Nashville or maybe Wake County, North Carolina, you're wrestling with the fact that the payers are not going to keep you whole versus your operating expense. And we had a couple sessions on pure economics and finance right now. And then if you watch the headlines, more systems willing to say, we're going to stand up to the payer, and that's extremely risky. And then I've heard stories of late where the payer is basically saying, we're going to throw you some cash. We're going to give you 50 million bucks, but we're not going to keep you whole on the year over year rate increases. And that just strikes me as a crazy economic culture right now, particularly for our members. In most markets, it's a year over trade-off as commercial payer percentage goes down, public payer percentage goes up. That's most of the country with the exception of the markets I mentioned. It's going to be tough sledding, even as our members have worked so hard on their operating costs, on labor costs, and have made some real dents in the workforce issues. It's going to be extremely difficult.
And in that environment, most of our systems and the places where at least our audience's ears usually perk up is when we start talking, okay, how do you find and balance growth within that? Our message this year was around harnessing growth. What were some of your big takeaways there? I did a talk in that vein and I can talk more about it, but what struck you?
We want to call it a few things. And unless there's tremendous organic growth in your market, and some of our members certainly have that, you got to be focused on four things. It is system of care development, which means focusing outside the walls of the inpatient campus into certain aspects of ambulatory and post-acute care and home care. Even more important is consumer strategy right now and how you're going to deliver more in a competitive environment for access. And terms we use now, share of wallet. So what percentage of the consumer spend are you getting? How much churn are you getting with your patient population? In other words, year over year, is it the same people? Are they coming back? And then finally, is there loyalty? And we have data to show the fact that loyalty's never been lower in healthcare, and it gets down to access to specialists. If they can't get in, they will go somewhere else. So if you're trying to play a market share game or break into a new market, you have to be able to work on those things specifically. And then there's network integrity, which is just the continuity across the system of care. And most of our members have a number, which is about 50% of their patients go elsewhere in some part of their journey through the system. Right now, care coordination is such an important strategic issue. And then service line optimization is the last one. And that means it can mean different things in different markets. It could be about where you're positioning certain services across your system. If you have multiple sites, it could be more about which service lines are you focusing on to get your fair share of the tertiary quaternary procedures. And we had several sessions on this that dug into the analytics fairly deeply. Trevor, what was your takeaway?
Those are the types of discussions I was having with members throughout the time, and any of our messages there resonated. But one thing that I heard changing the way health systems and especially strategy teams are talking about is on the consumer side. I feel like for a long time it was, yeah, we know we need to get there. The data's not great. We're trying. And now I've started to hear we actually have visibility here and we are thinking about it as part of our strategy, but we're still not moving the needle. We're finally paying attention, but things we thought were going to make a big impact, it's slower and tougher than we expected. To me, that was a change in tone and a change in realization and acceptance that, yeah, this is part of what strategy does. It's not pie in the sky anymore. It's real and it's really hard to move and we need to get better at it fast. So I like that. One other place that you highlighted that we spent some time, I feel like we're always trying to spend more here, is on the clinical innovation side. Where were you focused? What do you think? Which messages really hit?
Our colleagues hit on 5 major areas, and we'll follow up on this. Each of them is moving at different rates, at different paces. So we talked about smart hospital rooms, and for me, this ties into the world of virtual nursing that most of our members are pursuing aggressively right now. You can see clinical operations changing in real time. So that's number one. Accelerated drug discovery and clinical trials. So much going on there. And Trevor, in a couple sessions, we hit on the importance of pharmacy. And just for our listeners, for most systems right now, pharmacy could be 30%, 35% of the top line of net patient revenue, and potentially even bigger than that on your operating margin overall, particularly for academic systems when you incorporate 340B and also especially pharmacy. And then we talked about the pipeline of drugs that's coming in those spaces, cellular genetic therapies, mRNA therapies. It's an extraordinary time. These are multi-million-dollar drugs. So your committees that make decisions on pharmacy and therapeutics are going to be extremely busy. The economics of paying for these drugs have not been worked out. We have breakthrough drugs coming all over the place. And by the way, thanks to Vizient, we have a great depth of expertise in this space. 1 in 8 Americans has tried at least or has been taking the weight loss drug. I don't know if you would expect that to be bigger than that or smaller than that, but the ripple effects we'll be watching for 10 years and how it plays out with different diseases. Already, of course, diabetes, but then heart disease, cancer. Is it a wonder drug or are there unforeseen consequences of taking it that we don't know about? We talked about smart hospital rooms, the drug side, home health hubs. So not hospital homes, something much broader than that. that's coming into that part of system of care and what that can look like in the future. Personalized treatments, getting more accessible, thanks to all the data assets we have as a system right now. And then we talked about something a bit farther out, which is like extended reality. And yes, you can picture that headset that you've seen people wear for gaming. Gradually, that technology is working its way into healthcare. And it's been studied for many years in specific types of disease like chronic pain or burn injuries. It's coming, it's moving soon. And just some of the visualizations we have about what the future may look like and already is transforming right now is a powerful story.
And a bunch of those things, it's easy to understand them and think about them in small application, but most of our audience is in huge systems. So systemness and thinking about scale is another huge topic. Where are you seeing progress focused?
My least favorite term in healthcare is systemness, in part because it's not a real word and we don't know what it means, but we did try to tackle it. And a lot of it comes down to almost the softer things. It's not about doing everything the same way across a health system. It's about having certain things that may be centralized, decentralized, making decisions about service distribution. But then we get into how are you managing clinical quality and culture. We got into this in our final talk at the conference with Vizient's chief medical officer, David Levine, and he's very compelling about this. And I try to kind of pin him down like, all right, what's the culture conversation? We have measurement tools for that through Vizient's company called Safe and Reliable, which is powerful. But he got into very specific examples that where he had a great story about walking into a hospital, wandering around, which he tends to do, and walking onto a unit, and someone came up to him and said, I need you to wash your hands. And Dr. Levine is a emergency room physician. He's really good about this, but he said something in the culture got this person to approach him as a visitor in the hospital, say, I need you to wash your hands right now. And it's built into the incentives of this organization. It gets down to that level of what do people care about? How are they coached? How are they trained? And then how are they working on their unit? And we heard a lot about rounding and huddles and experts on the front line to problem solving. It's a lot of small stuff. And as we connect it back to the results of Vizient's clinical database, which is the powerful tool that most of the academic systems use, there's an abundance of evidence that the cultural aspects of that mean a lot as you approach safety, quality, effectiveness, patient-centeredness, equity, and a couple of the other domains I'm forgetting. I'm glad we got to address some of the softer stuff this year. It's a bit squishy. I don't know what the word is. We hit it harder than we ever have.
I agree. It feels soft and squishy, but it has to because we're talking about systems spread over huge geographies with teams that are on a team but never may interact. And like the idea that culture is kind of the glue between the immeasurable piece or the hard to measure piece. I like it. I buy it. And I think it really resonated with the systems that have been working on this. All right. What about a few closing thoughts as you came to the end? What was top of mind? What are you hoping systems took away?
I'm positive 2 to 3 years post-pandemic, people are taking on the tough challenges of redesigning clinical care and clinical operations. And just a few thoughts from our colleague, Andrew, who focuses on digital and AI and virtual. He had a quote about something like, we resist change and maybe to our disadvantage. So his message was, change it unless the clear old way is substantially better. And we tend to think about that in the opposite way in healthcare. We're resistant to change unless we think the new way is better. He's turned that around on us. I mentioned David Randall's quote before, create and predict chaos in the organization. And then back to our theme of pivotal moments. As a leadership team, you have to anticipate the pivots. And that means having a different approach to your strategic plan. And I took great inspiration from Cynthia Kahn, who's the strategy person at Northwell in New York. And she and her team just did a strategic plan for strategic planning in the organization about what's the role moving forward and how can they make more of an impact. I thought that was phenomenal. Trevor, you've been speaking to strategic planners across the country. Any thoughts to add to that?
There's a sense of optimism right now. A lot of strategy leaders are both acknowledging that a lot of decisions in the last few years were made with more operational and financial priorities as the things that tipped the scales, but they got better at understanding how important implementable strategies were and how important understanding those operational hurdles could be. And so going forward, as everyone's trying to get really precise with a few pivots, a few priorities for growth. And I just in general heard a lot of optimism and excitement that sure, we can't build everything. We have limited resources and it's probably going to stay that way. But generally, I feel like strategy teams feel like they're up to the task. And so that's always an exciting, positive tone to leave on. Bill, thanks as always for your leadership around Executive Summit. And thanks for summarizing our messages and what we heard from our members this year. Thanks as always to our listeners. And Bill, I always value your perspective. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us, and or follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn at Sg2 Healthcare. And if you want to talk more about innovative healthcare strategies, you can always email me at sg2perspectives@sg2.com. Finally, Sg2 is a Vizient company, and there are a bunch of Vizient podcasts that you might like. You can find them at Vizient /podcasts. Have a great day.